When Samantha's work dinners start stacking up like unpaid bills, Mark does what any reasonable systems analyst would do. He investigates, quietly, methodically. What he finds is worse than he expected, and it's about to make breakfast very awkward. Mark wasn't the suspicious type. That's what he told himself, anyway. But when Samantha started clutching her phone like it was a lifeline and spending nights networking until well past midnight, even he couldn't brush it off as innocent. In the early days, she would at least text him updates from her work events. Now she didn't even try. Instead, she'd roll in smelling faintly of a cologne he didn't own and brush off his raised eyebrow with a distracted "It's late. Can we not do this now?" Mark believed in one thing above all else: data. Emotions were fine, but they lied more than they told the truth. Data, though, that was different. Cold, hard evidence didn't get muddled in the mess of feelings. And since Samantha's behavior was beginning to feel like one of those bugs he dealt with in client software, he decided to treat it like one. So 3 nights ago, while Samantha was out for drinks with her team, Mark put his trust in a tool he knew better than he knew her: his laptop. After all, he spent his days stress-testing digital infrastructures for weaknesses. A marriage? Not so different from a computer system, really. You just had to know where to look for cracks. It took him less than 10 minutes to set up the monitoring software. He justified it with that timeless, totally legitimate excuse: he had to be sure. The app wasn't visible on her screen, and it sent updates directly to his email, listing her texts, calls, locations, the works. He felt a pang of guilt, but it passed quickly, dissolved by years of watching his clients betray their own systems with laziness and shortcuts. He clicked install and in that moment, understood 2 things. He had crossed a line, and he was fine with it. The very next day, he had what he needed. Not some dramatic, explicit exchange, but a flirty back and forth with a guy named Brad. Brad, as in the type who probably wore fitted polo shirts and called every beer he ordered a cold one. In every message, Brad was wishing he could see her, punctuated with enough winky faces to make a middle schooler blush. Then right there, the smoking gun. "See you at 7 at my place. You know where the key is. Can't wait." Mark didn't feel anger or heartbreak, not really. It was more of a detached curiosity, like watching a bad movie you can't turn off. The pieces fell together neatly: the late nights, the locked phone, the perfumed clothes. But mostly, he felt vindicated. His gut, and the data, didn't lie. He'd gathered all the proof he needed, and that feeling, the cold certainty of it, was oddly comforting. The next morning, Mark did something he hadn't done in years. He got up early and made breakfast. Pancakes, to be specific, which Samantha used to love before her life became one big networking event. When she came downstairs and saw the spread, she hesitated, her usual look of practiced distraction replaced by surprise. Mark hid a smirk as he watched her try to gauge his mood. "Morning," he said, motioning to the pancakes. "Made breakfast. Thought it'd be nice to have a normal morning." She blinked, thrown off balance but trying not to show it. "Oh wow. Thanks, Mark." She took a seat across from him, forcing a warm smile as she poured syrup onto her plate. Her phone, out of sight but likely within arm's reach, sat on the table just beside her hand. They ate in silence, Mark slicing through the quiet with the occasional question about her day or plans. Samantha was careful with her answers, keeping things short and polite, unaware of what was about to come her way. When her plate was nearly empty, he leaned back, took a sip of coffee, and finally said it. "So, how's Brad?" Her fork paused, mid-air. The shift in her face was fascinating, a smooth transition from surprise to confusion to a practiced smile, which froze when she realized he was serious. "Who?" she managed, a bit too quickly, her voice a pitch higher than usual. "Brad." Mark shrugged, keeping his tone light, even casual. "The guy you were with last night." "Don't insult my intelligence, Sam. I've seen the texts." Her face twisted in a mixture of disbelief and anger. "You went through my phone?" She tried to sound indignant, but the guilt seeped through her expression like ink on wet paper. "Yep," he replied, taking another bite of pancake, savoring it as if they were discussing the weather. "Turns out when you leave your phone next to someone who tests security systems for a living, you're practically inviting him to take a peek." She scowled, the defensiveness slipping out. Mark, Maybe if you paid more attention to me and less to your laptop, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Mark chuckled, the sound colder than he intended. I think I've been paying plenty of attention, Sam. More than you know. But hey, I guess I'm just the guy who pays the bills around here, right? He pointed his fork at her, grinning as her face reddened. So, here's the deal. You've got until tonight to pack your things. I'll be back at 8. If you're here, I'll help you carry your boxes out. If not, well, we both get what we wanted. Her mouth opened and closed as she sputtered, looking for a retort. Mark watched her struggle, that rational part of him finding it almost satisfying to see her like this, trapped by her own choices. Finally, she stormed off upstairs, probably to make a hasty plan with Brad, or to beg forgiveness, or maybe just to cry. It didn't matter to him. He grabbed his keys and left. He'd already decided how the rest of the day would play out, and he intended to stick to it. Mark returned home at exactly 8 p.m., as he'd said he would, the same unshakable calm draped over him. Samantha's car was still in the driveway, as expected. He hadn't truly thought she'd leave without another attempt at a performance. When he stepped inside, he found her sitting on the couch, looking tense, her hair disheveled, and a couple of half-packed boxes scattered around. She'd put on that mix of sadness and defiance that had always served her well in the past. Mark, she started, her voice softer than usual, trying to sound vulnerable. Can we just talk for a minute? By all means. He didn't sit, just leaned against the door, crossing his arms, watching her with cool detachment. Samantha's gaze dropped as if she were searching for the right words, a pause to add to the drama. Look, I know I screwed up. But maybe if you and I tried to. Spare me. He gestured toward the half-packed box near her feet. I'm here to make sure you leave, not to play therapist. She gave him a look of wounded outrage, though they both knew she'd planned for this moment the way she planned for those work events, all pretense, none of it real. This isn't easy for me, Mark, she said, clutching at some invisible string of sympathy. Mark shrugged, enjoying the irony. It's not supposed to be easy. It's cold facing consequences. Her eyes flashed with a spark of anger, but she kept her voice low, controlled. Maybe if you paid as much attention to me as you do to your computers, none of this would have happened. Alright. That's on me, isn't it? You got bored, so here we are, he replied, deadpan. Maybe I should have downloaded some new software, updated my relationship protocols to keep you entertained. Is that really how you're going to handle this? Throw away years of marriage because of one mistake. She made a last attempt at a tear, eyes welling up, her hand on her chest in that staged sincerity he used to fall for. Funny how you can call it one mistake when it's been months of texting, sneaking around, and meeting up with Brad. Or does your math work differently? She bristled, her face hardening again. I've had enough of this, she snapped, her voice losing its soft edge. You can't just throw me out. Oh, I'm not throwing you out. Mark pulled a neatly folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket, handing it to her with a small, smug smile. I thought you might want to keep this as a memento. Samantha frowned, snatching the paper from his hand. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the words as her face paled. Dear Brad, thanks for taking over so much of my wife's time. She's clearly happier with you, and hey, you're welcome to the bills she's racked up under my roof. Thought you'd like to know that she won't be staying here anymore. Good luck explaining that to your wife. Ma. Samantha's mouth fell open, her hands shaking as she held the paper. You sent this to him? Oh, I sent it to him all right. And since I had a little extra time this afternoon, I also sent a copy to his wife. Lovely woman. She found it just as interesting as I did. Her face went white, the shock quickly turning to anger. You had no right. Actually, I had every right, he cut in, calm as ever. You wanted Brad, well, now he gets the whole package. And you? You get to explain it to everyone you managed to fool along the way. Samantha stared at him, fists clenched, the look of someone who realized the game had finally, completely slipped out of her hands. I never thought you'd do something this petty. Mark laughed, a short, hollow sound. Petty? I'm just thorough, Sam. It's what I'm paid to do. He pointed to her boxes with a smirk. Now, get packing. I've done more than enough for you. She opened her mouth, probably to argue, to scream, maybe even cry, but no words came. For once, she was left standing there, completely at a loss. And for Mark, that was almost enough. After Samantha left, Mark sat alone in the quiet of the house. He half expected her to come back, banging on the door with some desperate last-ditch excuse or empty apology, but the minutes ticked by, and the house stayed silent. Outside, her car finally pulled away, its taillights shrinking in the dark, and for the first time in what felt like years, he took a deep, steady breath. Mark had spent so much of the last few months feeling like he was stuck in some sick game, moving pieces around in a puzzle he couldn't see. But now that it was over, he felt something strange. Not relief, not sadness. Just emptiness, as if all the noise that had filled his life had been cut off abruptly. Although the emptiness was still there, but it was accompanied by a strange sense of closure, the kind you get from finally shutting a door that had been creaking open for too long. He wasn't sure what his next move would be, or how he'd move on from all this. Maybe he'd take up running, or go on that road trip he'd always put off. But whatever it was, he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't be looking back.